Roger Griffiths here, the publisher of The Hub. Welcome to this, our continuing series, Trump's Trade War. Day 31, it is a consequential moment in this trade bust-up between Canada and the United States. Large tariffs landing 25% on the vast majority of Canadian exports into the U.S. To help break it all down and talk about what comes next, we're pleased to welcome on to the program Ian Lee, Associate Professor at the Sprott School of Business. Ian, quite a day.
It is remarkable. I think it's horrible we've arrived here. I don't blame this on the fates of gods and impersonal forces. Of course, I blame Mr. Trump, but I also think that we are complicit in Canada, and I mean by we, it's not the royal we, it's the leadership of our country has for many years. So this isn't a partisan statement. I don't belong to any political party. I do not donate funds to any political party. I do not allow lawn signs in any election, federal, provincial, or municipal, so I don't compromise my own independence. But this has been a long time coming, this train wreck, and for many, many years, we have 40 or 50 or 60 years, Canada has pursued, John Ibbitson calls it the Laurentian elites. I don't care really what title we give to the consensus that has existed amongst political decision makers in Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto. But I've characterized it most recently when I testified before the Senate committee a week ago as this belief that we can subsidize, protect and regulate our way to prosperity.
Yeah, well said.
And I think what we're seeing, I think we're seeing it's a failure. And I just want to draw a parallel because there are people in this city. I've lived in Ottawa all my life, and I know a lot of people in the different political parties who say, "Well, we got to go the European model." Well, yeah. Mario Draghi, a very distinguished individual, in his recent report, which I read, has analyzed the crisis in collapsing competitiveness and productivity in Europe. And when you read that report, you think, he could be describing Canada. We are facing many of the same issues.
We call it Laurentian capitalism here, Ian,
yes.
at the Hub. It's an idea that not too much competition, just the appearance of competition, but lots of oligopolies, duopolies. And you're right,
exactly.
It's created a crisis of growth, which now slams head on into 25% tariffs. Yes. Ian, where I want to go with you next is the economic fallout here, because we know the Canadian economy was weak going into this tariff war that was officially launched last night at 12:01 a.m. by President Trump. What are you going to be looking for in terms of where shoes start dropping in the Canadian economy? Is it unemployment? I'm concerned about housing. Our housing market is very weak. This is going to cast a big pall of uncertainty over the single biggest asset class in Canada. What are you looking at, Ian? What are you worried about?
I don't disagree with what you said, but the one I'm going to look at most immediately is the exchange rate. I'm a former banker years ago. Back in the 70s, early 80s, I was 9 years in banking. I lent millions of dollars to small and medium-sized enterprises, including a lot of real estate, by the way, in the Ottawa region. And that's where I got my training. The BMO, the Bank of Montreal, trained the dickens out of all of us, and I got superb training there. And I got on the ground, learning how capitalism works at the granular level. And I realized at a very young age how vulnerable Canada is because of our exchange rate. We are next door to the world's largest, most dynamic, most innovative country in the world. Whether people love or hate the States doesn't really matter. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't change the facts. It's the new, I would say, the modern Roman Imperium. It's Rome at the height of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar, in my view.
And now Caligula's taken the throne. Nero or Caligula, exactly. Ian. I don't know. You take your pick. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Right. So to answer your question, the exchange rate has always fascinated me because we're next to the world's reserve currency and the only reserve currency called the USD. And everything around the world is priced either directly or indirectly in USD. Not just American goods, but not just oil, but just about everything. And so where I'm going with this is I want to see how far the dollar is going to crash.
Right.
The dollar's going to go
Stagflation,
down.
Ian, is that what you're worried about? Stagflation? We're going to
Well,
start importing inflation because the Canadian dollar is going to have to adjust sharply downwards to basically act as the buffer. And the Bank of Canada seems to be okay with that. Tiff Macklin signaling that the dollar is there for just that function. But doesn't that, Ian, then mean all the vegetables we buy from Southern California, all the software that we're importing from the United States to run our businesses, that's all going to be more expensive?
you're absolutely right. That's just the first shoe to drop. I mean, when the currency declines precipitously, then imported goods, and we do import 1/3 of our GDP in totality. So that's about $1 trillion. And it's not for those who say, okay, well then I'll buy goods that aren't from the States. They've missed the point. They've missed the point. All goods around the world, no matter where they come from, are either directly priced in US dollars or
Yeah,
they're priced
their inputs are.
indirectly
Yep.
because every currency, if anybody wants to ever have fun, go sit in front of a Bloomberg terminal and then start modeling and saying, show me the exchange rate between USD and the Chinese RMB, or how about the peso and the USD? I don't care what currency you choose in the world. There's a correlation. That is to say, the independent variable is the US dollar because it is the world's
Yeah.
superpower, and it influences the other currencies. So whatever we're importing is going to go up in price, whether it comes from the United States or not, and that's going to be very hurtful, harmful in terms of inflation. But Rudyard, one more quick point, because nobody's talked about this, partly because it's so scary. And I've studied this just out of just idle curiosity, never thinking it would ever come to Canada. And that's so-called currency crises you see in developing countries.
Right.
Argentina, the peso crisis of 1998. Mexico, the peso crisis, I think it was 2001. Some people say that's ancient history. Well, let's talk about a country as I speak at this very moment called Russia, where the ruble collapsed and the central bank drove interest rates to right now as I speak to
Right.
23%.
Yeah.
And so Macklem, whom I admire enormously, but he can't go out there and start scaring the hell out of us, let's be frank. He says, oh, I'm not too worried about that. The Canadian dollar is a good buffer, which is true in normal times. What if the Canadian dollar collapses down to 50?
Yeah. Well,
It's
interest
going
rates
to, and
will
then
interest rates will have to go up in order to convince
exactly.
foreign buyers who are that important margin, in the bond market to step in again and buy our debt. I mean, doesn't it all come down to that, Ian? That we have a lot of debt to sell. We're going to have more debt to sell because of how governments now respond to these tariffs, which seems to be early indications to pull out the COVID-style checkbook again and start writing large checks, in this case to businesses and industries affected by the tariffs.
You're absolutely right, and that does worry me. Although I hope we do not go down that road. I know that quite a few people are drawing parallels to the pandemic. The Prime Minister has, and I think he's completely wrong.
Here,
And so
here.
does Governor
Yeah.
Macklem in that speech, which he gave just last week in Mississauga, Oakville, where he said, "Look, the parallels are not appropriate at all because the pandemic was a cyclical issue.
Yeah.
The disease rolls in, we send everybody home, shut down the economy, the disease goes away, everybody goes back to work. It's like any cyclical phenomenon; it goes up, it goes down. This is a structural change." And so the idea that that we can just pump a lot of money in, I think is the worst thing we can do, not only because I don't think we can afford it because we're so heavily indebted. When you look at the totality of government indebtedness, not just the federal, but provincial and municipal, because the government of Canada is the lender of last resort, the financier of last resort. So that's a concern. But the larger issue is that we want structural adjustment to this completely changed economic environment.
Yeah.
The last thing you should do is what we've done for 50 years, which was we've tried to prevent adjustments to changing
Yes.
economic conditions by subsidize, protect, and regulate,
Yep.
and that has blunted the
And
adjustment
Ian, we
and
know
ensured
we know
remain
that
uncompetitive.
all these protected industries are going to drape themselves in the Canadian flag and say, "Oh, we can't have American banks up here. We can't have American telecommunications companies. We can't have, in effect, more competition." I guarantee you that's what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months.
I do too.
Ian, I want to end with you on an important point that you've been making the last few days, which is about the cost of reciprocal tariffs. Right now, we have a federal government in the form of the dying days of Justin Trudeau, who has announced what is it, 30 billion immediately off the top, ramping up to 150 billion over 21 days of reciprocal tariffs. Explain to our audience what a reciprocal tariff is and why you think it's as dumb as a bag of hammers when it comes to thinking about how we should respond to the American trade threat.
Which is what I did say. Um, the we dress it up, especially politicians are good at this. I'm not being cynical. They do. They dress up words when they want to make it sound really nice. They give a really nice word. So tariffs and taking on Donald Trump sounds so, the right thing to do. These tariffs of almost 200 billion, let's call it what it is. It is a tax on the Canadian people, on their food and their energy and everything else they consume at Canadian Tire or Loblaws or Home Depot or Shoppers Drug Mart, and it is going to reduce our standard of living in a very significant way. So what we're doing is we're saying, I think they're doing it for opportunistic reasons, the politicians, not because it's for the greater good of Canada. But tariffs have been discounted and deconstructed by everybody, any serious person, economist that I've ever read, including Macklem in his speech last week, where he had not one positive thing to say about tariffs because they are so destructive. But nonetheless, they are going down that road. And what this is, why it's so bad, is that bad as Trump is, and as harmful as what Trump is doing is going to be for Canada. So what we're saying is, what Trump is doing is so horrible to us, we're going to double down and make it much, much worse for Canadians. Now, you can't get dumber than that.
Okay, but Ian, explain to this layperson what a reciprocal tariff is, because isn't it us putting costs on our goods that are going to them? So why is it affecting me if I'm putting, I don't know, an extra 25% on maple syrup that the country is exporting? Break that down for me. Why is that bad for us? Isn't it punching them in the nose? This is what we want to do. We want to hurt them. We're offended.
No, but the reciprocal tariffs are going to be imposed on tariffs coming into Canada.
Okay.
We're targeting Kentucky bourbon. Not that I would ever drink Kentucky bourbon, but we're targeting American goods coming to Canada. They're going to be bought by Canadians. So when they arrive at the border in trucks or trains or whatever, the CBSA has a well-developed protocol to evaluate what's there. They assess them and they pass it on to the importer, who then passes it on to the distributor and ultimately to the retailer, who passes it on to us. So that $200 billion is literally a tax on us that's going to come out of our pockets. So we are going to have $200 billion in aggregate less than what we had before to spend. So this is punishing, targeting, punishing, and exploiting ordinary Canadians who are already struggling with affordability by making things even less affordable than before, even though these politicians have said they want to make the world more affordable.
But Ian, the politicians get to redistribute that money to whoever they want, whatever industry they think deserves it the most, whatever group of Canadians they feel like. This is why, Ian, isn't it correct that it took us so long, so many decades through the 19th century and into the early 20th century to get rid of tariffs? Because they are, excuse my French, crack cocaine for politicians. Politicians love tariffs. It puts them at the center of the economy. It allows them to decide who the winners and losers are. I mean, I worry here, Ian, it's easy to start a war. It's hard to finish one. And I want to give you the last word here. How long do you think this trade war can go on? Is this a matter of days and weeks, or are we at risk here of something that could be extended, something that could be protracted?
My fear is we are at risk. In fact, way before Trump was elected, I've talked for the last several years, the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, about what I call the Argentinization of Canada. Argentina in 1918 was richer than Canada on a per person basis. And yet in 50 years after Isabel and Juan Perón, they managed to drive this country, this extraordinarily wealthy country, down to a country that today the GDP per capita, average income per person, is $14,000. In other words, they've experienced abject poverty. And my fear is that we're going incrementally down the road. We may not end up exactly at Argentina, but this idea that we will not open up the economy, we will not restructure, we will continue to do the failed policies of the past, and we will just slide down into genteel poverty, similar to some of the middle income countries. And if we don't get off that, and it really comes down to the leadership in the next 3, 6, 9 months, whether we have that epiphany. And if we don't, then I think we're going to slide down and become an impoverished, a very much lower income first world country, and possibly slip into middle income country status if we don't respond in a much more strategic manner in the way that was advocated by the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers, in her speech a year ago called Time to Break the Glass.
Yeah, hear, hear. So Ian Lee from the Sprott School of Business, where he's an associate professor, thank you so much for coming on the program today. Let's do this again soon.
My pleasure, Rudyard. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you for watching today's edition, day 31 of Trump's trade war. It is a momentous one. We got tons of content on our YouTube channel, on our podcast feeds, and on the hub.ca, breaking down this story each and every way, featuring our best analysis and thinkers. Check it all out now. Back to you shortly with more great insights. Bye-bye.